911, what's your emergency? 911, what's your emergency?
Be advised, Car 4 has control of the pursuit. Proceed with caution.
Hello, everyone. How are you guys tonight? It's good to see everyone. Welcome to Behind the Crime Door. I am Kristen. For anyone who's new here, please like and subscribe and hit the bell so that you know the next time that I go live or drop a video. I certainly appreciate it. Hello. Hi, John. How are you? It's good to see you. Hey, Shelby. Hi, Judy, if you're still here. Hey, Deb. Hey, Deb Porter. How are you? Hey, Maria. Always good to see you. Thank you guys for all being here. Hi, Melissa. Hey, Tech Def. How are you? It's good to see you guys. So there's an echo. Echo. And it's not on my end. I don't have anything open that would be echoing. Hold on a second. Is there still an echo? Okay. Yeah, it's not on my end, John. Make sure you don't have me open in two places maybe or something. That sometimes, or exit and come back in. Sometimes that will help. So guys, welcome. We're going to go over the Casey Anthony case tonight. I have my daughter waiting backstage. She's going to help me with this and we're going to discuss it. True Crime Maria is also here, as you guys know. She's one of our moderators and very, very good friend of mine. And Maria has a lot to add to this because she was one of the people who really felt that Casey Anthony was guilty for everything that she was accused of. And when the new documentary dropped, she asked me if I had watched it. And I told her that I had, and she wanted to talk about it. And she hadn't watched it yet. And I told her that I wasn't going to discuss it with her until she actually went and watched it herself and made up her own mind. And I'm going to let her tell you guys in chat about it, but she did change her mind about everything that she thought she knew about this case. So everyone, I want to welcome my daughter. Will everyone say hello to Shelby? You guys have all seen her before. But there she is. Hey, my dear, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Good.
I'm excited.
Oh, good, Melissa. I like the fact that you don't know much about the case, because then you'll get to hear everything as a new person. But this case was a huge case in this country. But I think, and what I'm going to do with you guys, I'm going to go through, as you guys, if you have questions or you have statements about what's being said, I'm going to go through and star those, and we'll go over them at the end of the live. So that way it'll flow really well. So, and there's a lot to cover because it was a long case. So I want to make sure that we get right into it, because I don't want to be here forever. But I do want to preface it with this. This case was so big in this country that Casey Anthony became known as the most hated woman in America. And she also was given a name by Nancy Grace as Tot Mom. And it was, in my opinion, it was horrific. This woman had lost a child, and people were giving her absolutely no credit, no respect of anything. And they basically hung her in the court of public opinion before we ever knew any of the evidence, of the real evidence. So keep that in mind as we go through this. So just give me a minute to get my ducks in a row. Was that Jackson?
No.
I don't know what that was. Thought I heard somebody scream.
No, he's coughing.
Oh, never mind. Sorry.
He's over there playing a video game.
Okay. All right. Oh, so the basic, the beginning of this, I'm going to put up a picture. You guys hold on a moment so that we have, oops, got to find them first. So you guys can at least see what I'm talking about. I'm just going to pull up a picture of Casey and Kaylee right now and let you guys see that first. Get my stuff out of behind it. And I've got stuck back here. All my tabs. Tons of them. Tons of tabs. Yeah, that works. So that is a picture of Casey Anthony and Kaylee Anthony, her daughter. This case was back in 2008 is when this happened. And at that time, true crime was a thing on CNN. A lot of the talk shows were having their, I don't want to say a heyday with it, but every night they were talking about some case that was usually pretty big in the news. And this one happened to take off and become bigger. If you thought that the case with, oh, I always forget their names. What's the girl, you guys help me out, that I'm so sorry I can't remember her name. Just last summer, Brian Laundrie, and what was the girlfriend?
Gabby Petito.
Gabby Petito. If you guys thought that Gabby's case took off and went viral, think of this case that we're going to talk about tonight, 100% more. I mean, it was just huge and everybody talked about it. So I am surprised of people who don't know, and it may very well be just the fact that you don't follow this, or maybe you were too young when this was going on. So all of those things are quite possible. But what happened was on July the 15th in 2008, it became known that Kaylee Anthony, the 2-year-old daughter of Casey, had disappeared and had been gone for 31 days. And she was first reported missing by her grandmother, Cindy. Now, Casey and Kaylee lived with her mother and father and brother at some point. He was also still living there, but I think he moved out at some point after Kaylee was born, in Florida, in their house that she grew up in, basically. And they had a above ground backyard swimming pool, and Kaylee would have been considered a very loved child. She had everything that children, when it came to toys, and if you saw her room, it was just this beautiful little girl's room that just had everything, all beautiful little bedding. It was, to look at it, you would have just thought that this girl was doted on. And that's what everybody said, that Casey was an amazing mom and that she loved her and took care of her and took her pretty much everywhere she went with her. Excuse me. But the last time that she was seen alive was in June of 2008. So 31 days she had been missing. And hold on one second. This trial and this case gripped our nation. It left many people angry and unsatisfied by the verdict, and many people felt that justice was not served. And there were others that wondered the opposite. They wondered what really did happen to Kaylee, and they believed that Casey was not guilty. There has been many books written on this case, many TV shows dedicated to it, and there has been 2 very well-known documentaries. There is a documentary that is out there now. It's a 3-part special that they did. I think you can still see it on Peacock. And then they have the one that was just dropped by Casey just a couple weeks ago, or a week ago. And when they talked about this case after she was reported missing, her family and her mom and her dad basically didn't understand. And they asked Casey, while they had her at the house, where Kaylee was. And she told them that last time she'd seen her, she had dropped her off at a nanny's house. And they asked her, a nanny, who's the nanny? And she gave this name of Zenaida Gonzalez. And they were like, well, why? What do you mean? Where is she? And she's like, she went to pick her up, and the woman didn't live there anymore, and Kaylee was gone. She didn't know where she was. So this was the story. And the 911 call was from Cindy Anthony, which is Casey's mom. And she told the operator that she said that she had her daughter there and she wanted the police to come because her granddaughter had been missing for over 30 days. And she said that Casey's car smelled like a dead body had been in it. And her exact words was, "It smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car." And the dispatcher asked her what she was talking about, and she told her again. And the 911 call is very strange. But so the news media grabbed a hold of Zenaida Gonzalez's name and started calling her Zanny the nanny, because people believed that it wasn't a nanny after at all, but it was a nickname for Xanax, that maybe she was using Xanax to put her daughter to sleep so she could go out and party. But there was a police officer when they finally came to the house. There was a lot of disruption. I don't think the police did a very good job in the very beginning by separating them and talking to them separately. Casey's dad is an ex-police officer. He was a police officer in Ohio for a number of years. And then when they moved to Florida, he started working security. He didn't go back to being a police officer. And he knew the ways of the police. He knew how investigations worked. He knew all of this. He knew how to speak cop, is my take on this. And his name is George. So George basically took over and started telling them what was going on and what the situation was in the house, and that they didn't believe Casey when she said that she didn't know where she was. They couldn't understand why she wouldn't know where her daughter was. So you can see how that would be very disturbing as grandparents to hear that your granddaughter's gone and her mother doesn't know where she is. But what got me was, they lived with them. Casey and Kaylee lived with them. Wouldn't you be upset when your daughter was missing for 31 days? Where was Casey? Why weren't they worried about where she was? Why didn't they report both of them missing? Hey, Steve, good to see you. Hey, Verbal Judo, thank you for being here. So that has always was a huge question in my mind in the very beginning, was why in the world did the parents not report both Casey and Kaylee missing? They lived in their home. So, she was eventually charged on October 14th of 2008 with capital murder. She pled not guilty, and there is a lot to go over with what happened and transpired in the beginning. She was charged with first-degree murder with premeditation, and aggravated manslaughter could have been an accident, because that when they gave the case to the jury, they told them they could find either or in the case. Now, the prosecution's case basically had very little to none physical evidence. This is a circumstantial case at best.
They didn't find her, Kaylee's body for, I believe, 5 to 6 months after they reported her missing.
Yes.
So by that time, the coroner could not find a cause of death. She was too decayed. Too many animals had been at her poor little body, and there was nothing. They
So
had
there
nothing.
was the delay in recovering Kaylee's remains. They built the case around Casey's moral character, her partying lifestyle, the fact that she was lying and caught in lies, and etc. They said that the Anthony's motive or Casey's motive for murdering Kaylee was that she didn't want the responsibility of being a mom anymore. Contrary to everything around them that spoke differently, all of Casey's friends, all of the things in the home that spoke differently, how everyone talked about Casey and how she doted on Kaylee. Casey Anthony was proven to be lying. She blamed a nanny that did not end up existing. She also lied about being employed at Universal Studios. She actually took the lead investigators on a goose chase to Universal Studios, and they actually walked down a hallway that ended in a dead end. And then they looked at her and said, "What's going on?" And she's like, "Well, I actually don't work here." And so they took her into a room and started questioning her about what was going on and why she was acting so bizarre and why she would not help them find her daughter. And she told them that she didn't know where her daughter was. She didn't know how to help them because she didn't know where her daughter was. The key evidence in this case, they took one strand of Kaylee's hair out of the trunk of Casey's car. One strand. The prosecution used new forensic techniques to test whether the hair was from a dead or a live person, and the results were inconclusive. And the defense claimed that this technique had never been vetted or used before, which was true. They had never tried to decide or discern whether or not you can tell if a hair is from a live person or a dead person. And in fact, what they were using to determine that test, the defense was later able to prove shows up in both dead hairs, people who are deceased, as well as people who are living. So it was very much not something that would be conclusive. The air sampling procedure. They used the air sampling out of the trunk air, believe it or not, to determine on whether or not there was a decaying body in the back of that trunk. That had never been used before in a court of law. And the scientist that actually took the stand was so bizarre and so unbelievable. I just absolutely thought it was absolute craziness when I heard it.
Yeah. All he talked about for the prosecution's expert witness was the smell samples that he took. He did not talk about carpet stains. He did not talk about other things that would have been found there had there been a dead body in the trunk. He discussed they didn't take carpet samples, I don't believe. The prosecution's expert witness was just a quack, in my opinion. Like,
Yeah.
it did not make sense. Like, how do you take, I mean, air doesn't just stay there. You can't just take an air sample from today and expect it to be the same next week. That's mind-boggling, in my opinion.
They also did a soma test that said that there was chloroform present in the trunk of the car. And this became a big deal because there was digital evidence on the family's computer, which all three people in the household used. Casey, George, and Cindy all used the same computer. And it showed that there was a search for how chloroform was made or whatever. And one of the things that happened was Cindy got on the stand and testified she's the one who made that search. She was actually looking up chlorophyll because her dog was getting sick and she thought that the dog was eating some sort of plant in the backyard that might have been making it sick. So she thinks that what happened was when she put in the searching for chlorophyll, chloroform also populated in the search. And so the defense, after the case was broken, after the case was over, the defense went back before they did this documentary, and they did a whole bunch of their own testing, you guys. We're going to get into that, and we're going to talk about that. But it is very, very difficult to make chloroform at home. In fact, the experts say that for somebody Casey's age and knowledge, there is absolutely no way that she would have ever been able to make chloroform at home. And the more likely place the chloroform came from that they saw tested in the back of the car was actually from cleaning supplies that were thrown away in the garbage that was in the back of her car. Because there are chloroform is used in some cleaning supplies. And it was not a concrete piece of evidence, but it was one of the so-called strongest pieces of evidence against Casey, even though Cindy got on the stand and testified under oath that it was her that did that search and not her daughter. Kaylee's remains were found on December the 11th of 2008. They were found inside a garbage trash bag. She had a blanket wrapped around her, and the blanket had been placed inside the trash bag, and duct tape had been wrapped around the top of the trash bag, and she had been thrown off the side of the road into a forested area a little over a block and a half from their home. It was not far from their home at all. And the cause of death by Dr. G, you guys, if you're familiar with her, I think she's got a show or used to on ID's Discovery. I kind of hear it now too. Hold on a second. Let me see why something's echoing.
I don't hear it. Sorry.
Do you have anything else open, Nicole, besides StreamYard?
Well, I have YouTube open, but it's muted.
Yeah, close it. Close YouTube. That's why we're hearing the echo.
Why? It's muted.
I think that's why we're hearing the echo, though.
Then I can't chat. Just FYI.
Okay. So, hang on a second. Okay. Open YouTube up on your phone, and you can chat on your phone.
It's fine.
So, Dr. G is the one who did the autopsy on Kaylee, and she said the cause of death was undetermined. And this was a huge limiting factor to the prosecution's case. They could not conclusively prove if she drowned or if she was murdered. There was no way that they were able to tell. And we'll get into that a little bit more as well, because one of their biggest things that the prosecution used was the duct tape. When they found Kaylee's body, her skull had come out of the bag. Her bones were spread all around because animals had gotten into that bag within that 6-month period of time and drug things all around in that area. And her little skull had come out. And when it rolled out of that bag, that duct tape got stuck in her hair and on the side of her cheek. And the prosecution ran with that and said that the duct tape was across her face and that Casey used the duct tape to smother her daughter. And there was no evidence of that. Absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. But they ran with it. And the defense said that it was an accidental drowning in the backyard family swimming pool, and that there was panic that ensued, and that George Anthony, the grandfather, who's a former police officer who was home that day with Casey and Kaylee, disposed of Kaylee's body. The defense also said that Casey Anthony lied because of her dysfunctional family. They told, it came out in court, that George was physically and mentally abusive to Casey and was able to keep her quiet. Not only was he physically and mentally abusive, he sexually assaulted his daughter when she was a young child. George was on the stand more than any other witness. There were over 100 of them in this case. And he denied those allegations on the witness stand. The defense brought up the fact that the prosecution was using fantasy forensics. They said the forensic techniques that were used by the prosecution in this case were fantasy. They'd never been proven in a court of law. They'd never been used in a court of law before, and there was no studies done on them. The prosecution believed she would plead guilty because of public outrage. So they tried to scare her by overcharging her. These are some of the theories and thoughts by law students that went over this case. The defense called their bluff, and they took the case to court, and the prosecution had to prove her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And the prosecution thought that Casey would crumble and that she would plea bargain with them. And it did not happen. Casey Anthony has never, ever admitted to hurting or harming her daughter. Her story has always been the same. She does not know what happened to her little girl, but she knows who was responsible. So, first-degree murder versus aggravated manslaughter. They charged her with conflicting sentences, and it was bad for the prosecution to do this because it made them look uncertain of what crime she committed. And that was a bad mistake for them to make. And they have the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The mistakes that the prosecution made in this case was over-trying the case. The prosecution depended too much on physical evidence that was not as certain as they believed. And they relied too much on untested forensic techniques like the smell test. They overcharged the case, put multiple severe charges on Casey Anthony, and under a lot of public outcry and pressure, the public wanted her put to death. So they charged her with first-degree murder, which is premeditated murder, carrying that hefty penalty. Prosecution believed that Anthony would plead guilty, but she was already deemed guilty by media and the public. So they gave her all of these charges to scare her, and it backfired on them. And Casey and her lawyers called their bluff. Anthony was involved after the case in civil cases after the criminal trial. There was Texas EquiSearch used their annual budget to investigate Kaylee's disappearance based on the lies that Anthony had told. And they sued her, and they won for $100,000. And the woman that Casey Anthony falsely accused of being the nanny that kidnapped Kaylee also tried to sue a defamation of lawsuit against Casey Anthony but they did not win. Casey actually won that case. So those are the things that happened in and around the case. And there's just so much. So on July 15th, 2008, Cindy Anthony called the police to report that Casey had stolen their family car, some money, and to inform them that Kaylee might be missing. The next day, Casey is arrested on suspicion of child neglect, and on August the 5th, she's formally charged. She's released on bail, and then she's arrested on charges of check forgery, petty theft, and some other charges, and her bond is revoked. On October the 14th, 2008, Casey Anthony is indicted on capital murder charges, and the child neglect charges are dropped shortly thereafter. In December, Kaylee's body and skeletal remains are found. On May 24th, 2011, the trial begins, and over the next couple of months, forensic evidence is presented, and the prosecution and defense argue their sides. On July 5th, 2011, Casey Anthony is found not guilty of first-degree murder. Part of the prosecution's case was that chloroform was used to subdue Kaylee, and that murder was premeditated, since Casey had looked chloroform up using the Mozilla Firefox browser. However, the internet history within Mozilla Firefox was an integral part of this prosecution's case for these claims, but investigators performed a keyword search of Casey Anthony's computer, which did yield results for the word chloroform, but they could not determine where that file resided and who brought that file up. They had no idea which family member, or if there was a friend or someone else that came into that house and actually did that search, even though Cindy Anthony took the stand and told everyone and the jury that it was her and why she was searching for chloroform, which she wasn't. It was chlorophyll. The evidence was crucial to this case, but the prosecution was unable to prove that Casey performed the search. In fact, Cindy testified that she performed the search. The investigators tried to use timestamps of the Mork database on the digital evidence to prove who had done the search. But there were some difficulties and a discrepancy with the evidence between forensic analysis methods. It is hard to prove who might have used the computer to do a search for something. Timestamping can only show you a piece of the puzzle. And I do think that this is a common issue with digital evidence that can be found on a computer that multiple people use. And you guys, I think that that's going to happen in the CSAM case with Kagan Klein, because multiple people were using that computer. During the initial examination of the data, net analysis software was used to examine the evidence, which provided timestamp information for the searches. And with this software, there was an option to present the timestamp as a local value adjusted for daylight savings time. And with net analysis, the examiner had UTC and local times adjusted for daylight savings time. The examiner wanted the evidence to shoe timestamp information in local time, not standard. To achieve this, another tool was used, but the second tool could not recover the Mork files. The examiner contacted the developer and they fixed the issue. The defense noticed the discrepancies between the results given by both tools, which called the legitimacy of the results into question. There are instances in which discrepancies in this evidence are found, and it is why it is a common practice to verify findings with more than one type of software or forensic method. As a juror, you are brought in to make a judgment on a case based on the evidence that the prosecution provides to you. It is their job to present the evidence in a way that proves beyond a reasonable doubt that the crime was committed by the defendant. In this case, a rather important piece of evidence that was crucial to the prosecution's attempt at doing this was perceived to have a major discrepancy. This would plant doubt in anyone's mind. And if I were a juror in a case in which inaccurate evidence was presented, it would affect my perception of the prosecutor's case. And when you are given your jury instruction and someone's life is on the line, you cannot find them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. At the end of the trial, right before they settled with their closing arguments, they called to the stand Lee Anthony, Casey's brother. And Casey's brother testified that when they were children, how they would dispose of their pets that had died. And he said that his father would take them and wrap them in a blanket and place them inside a trash bag and close the trash bag and seal it with duct tape and bury them in the backyard. That to me was absolutely huge. Absolutely huge. The Casey Anthony case was highly controversial. There were a lot of things that were not very clear about this case. The investigatory process was one-sided. They did not vet everyone in the house. There were 3 people living in that house, 2 of which were home the day that Kaylee supposedly disappeared. And this was George and Casey. And George was never looked at as a suspect. In fact, when investigators were asked about George, they said, well, George was a good guy. And I'm like, wow, you don't look at somebody because you perceive them as a good guy? It is very important during any trial that any evidence that you present in court can be held up and can be used to prove the guilt of the defendant. In this case, the prosecution was unable to do so since there were discrepancies with the evidence presented. This is the type of thing that can break a prosecution's case, and it did so in the case of Casey Anthony, and that is why she was found not guilty. There was too much reasonable doubt. The case of Florida versus Casey Marie Anthony began with both sides summing up their versions of what they believed the evidence would show. And from the prosecution, jurors heard a timeline of the defendant's activities before her mother reported Kaylee missing: parties, drinking, sleepovers with men. Those days, including getting a tattoo, participating in a hot body contest at an Orlando club, many Kaylee-free nights at her boyfriend Anthony Lazzaro's apartment, and many, many lies, the prosecution claimed. No one else benefited from the death of Kaylee more so than her mother, said Linda Drain Burdick in her opening statement. Kaylee's death allowed Casey to live a good life, at least for 31 days. From the defense, jurors were presented with an image of a very loving mother whose dysfunctional family forced her to live in a state of denial. They argued the family held very deep, dark secrets, including the fact that Casey had been sexually abused by her father and her brother. The defense also revealed their theory of the case that Kaylee drowned in the family pool as a result of what Jose Baez called an accident that snowballed out of control. He said it was an accident to which Casey's father, George, was privy. Baez said George Anthony tried to cover up the drowning at Casey's expense. The jury heard detailed stories from her mother, her brother, and finally Anthony herself of her business trips to Tampa and visits to an old flame that later proved to be false. Through recordings of Anthony's police interviews, jailhouse visits, and a 911 call, the silent woman at the defense table finally spoke. Throughout the conversations, one sentiment is conveyed to Anthony again and again: stop lying or face the worst consequence. Testimony earlier in the trial, which began in Florida in 2011, revealed that Anthony lied to her parents and avoided them for 31 days in the summer of 2008, while Kaylee was supposedly missing. And this week, jurors learned more about what Anthony told her parents during that time and what she was actually doing. In week 3 of the trial, with forensic testimony about how someone searched for chloroform and neck breaking on their computer in the home Anthony shared with her parents in Orange County, Florida, panelists were fully immersed in the physical reality of the 2-year-old's death: bones, decomposition, odor, and all. The prosecution called key forensic witnesses who describe in graphic detail the state of Kaylee's remains when she was found in a wooded area on December 11th, 2008. 6 months after she went missing, despite objections from the defense, jurors saw a video in which images of Kaylee's skull and the duct tape found across the front of it at the scene were superimposed over a photo of Kaylee still alive, smiling with her mother. That was never found. That duct tape was never across her mouth or her face. The prosecution argued that the video showed how the duct tape could have covered both Kaylee's nose and mouth, while the defense argued it was only designed to appeal to jurors' emotions. 3 years to the day, according to testimony, Kaylee Anthony was last seen alive. A group of trial followers released balloons in Kaylee's honor. One of the participants, David Wood, cried as he lamented over how, as he put it, anyone could hurt a child. Inside the courthouse, the focus shifted to the defense case. And Anthony's lawyers called forensic anthropologist Werner Spitz, who testified that he believed the tape found on Kaylee Anthony's skull was placed there long after the body had decomposed. He also said the tape could have been an effort to keep the jawbone attached so the body could be moved. Spitz also criticized the Orange County medical examiner, Dr. Jan Garvajalia, or Dr. G, for not opening Kaylee's skull when she examined the remains. Failing to do so, he said, resulted in a very shoddy autopsy. The defense continued its efforts to cast doubt on evidence presented by the prosecution. Cindy testified that she, not Casey, searched for chloroform on Anthony family computers. Earlier in the trial, computer experts testifying for the prosecution said someone in the Anthony home made searches for chloroform, how to make chloroform, neck breaking, and shovel, among other terms. Prosecutors alleged the searches proved premeditation and that records showed Casey was the only one who could have made the searches, even though that data search that they did and forensic search that they made of her computer could not show who made those searches. Cindy Anthony said she began by searching chlorophyll because she feared her dogs were getting sick from eating plants in her backyard. Both the dogs would eat the bamboo leaves in the back, so I started looking up sources from the backyard. She said, I started looking up chlorophyll, and it prompted me to look up chloroform. Jurors also heard testimony intended to rebut the state's key forensic evidence. Botanist Jane Bach testified that leaf debris found in and on the defendant's Pontiac Sunfire was not consistent with the leaves at the place where the body was found. She also testified to the defense's theory that the body had been moved, saying it could have been at the spot where it was found for as little as 2 weeks. Under cross-examination, she said that it could have been there much longer. And one of the things that happened in this case is that there was a electrical worker for the county who was out in that area in August of 2008 and actually found this bag, or saw this bag and these remains, and called it in to police and reported it. He actually reported it 3 times, and nobody came out until the 3rd time. And when police came out, they didn't want to walk down in there because it was a wet and mucky area, and it was just really kind of hard to get to, even though it was off, just basically right off the highway. You didn't have to walk very far, just down a slope and you were into it. But it was really an area that flooded a lot. And you know how Florida can be and the kinds of animals that they have in Florida. And I'm sure that they were worried about that. But it was an absolute bumbling mistake on the investigators in this case, that they did not investigate that thoroughly, because had they done that, it had only been possibly 2 months since Kaylee had been missing, and who knows what condition her body may have been in at that time. But instead, they waited, and in December, the same man went back to the location, and sure enough, there were the remains. And he called in to law enforcement again and said, "What in the world is going on? Somebody needs to come out here." And that's when they found her, when they actually finally did come out in December, and they found her. And that's pretty much, I mean, there's a lot, but that's pretty much the case itself. And for everybody that watched this, and I was one of them, unfold on television, because they allowed cameras in the courtroom and you could watch all of the proceedings, it actually became a media circus, an absolute media circus frenzy. Every single night it was on television, and they would rehash what happened in the courtroom that day. And Nancy Grace would continue to say that Tatman was horrible and needed to die. She needed the death penalty for what she did to her daughter. And it was, it just continued. And they did this for 3 years, because remember, Kaylee went missing in 2008 and was found in 2008, deceased. But Casey didn't go to trial until 2011. So for nearly 3 years, they convicted her in the court of public opinion. They convicted her. And it bothers me, you guys, because that's what we do in this country now. And it's just a circus, and it happens around all of our cases. Just keep watching what's going on in Idaho if you don't believe me. I mean, we had a guy this morning on the Idaho case, a YouTuber that's got over 35,000 subscribers, and he put out a video. He absolutely put out a video this morning where you can hear somebody screaming, "Stop it. Leave me alone." And he said that that was a neighbor recording what was heard in the middle of the night in Idaho. And it's not true. It's all fake. This is somebody who has a huge following on YouTube. So yeah, circus, definitely. one of the things that happened to Casey immediately after she was acquitted, her defense team became extremely fearful for her life because they knew that everybody wanted her dead. The majority of people in this country wanted her dead, and they didn't know what to do. And Patrick McKenna, who was the lead investigator on her case, said, tell me what I need to do to help her. And Jose said, you need to get her out of Florida. You got to get her out of here. And he put her in his car and drove. And they took her to the Panhandle in Florida and put her in a house. And after she got into the house, the public found her. They had to leave. So they're running all up the eastern seaboard in his car, trying to keep her safe. And he talks about her and her demeanor and how she is in the car. And as they're on their way driving to Ohio, to where she grew up with her family before they moved to Florida, she started to cry. And she said to him, well, exactly what her father had done to her when she was a little girl. She just opened up and told him all of the abuse, everything that had happened. And this was Patrick McKenna, the lead investigator, not an attorney, a lead investigator. He was also the lead investigator for the O.J. Simpson trial and O.J. Simpson case. He is very well known. He has done a lot of profile work for John Lennon, Yoko Ono, a whole bunch of other high-profile people. But the thing to remember is that he did believe her, and all of her defense team believe her. All of her defense team believed her. None of them thought she did this. And they stuck by her side all these years. And in the end, it took her 11 years to finally be able to speak her truth. And I'm going to let Nicole tell you about the documentary. I'm going to let Nicole tell you about how the documentary came about and what we learned from Kaylee's death through the documentary of Casey. And then we'll discuss it, you guys.
Ready?
Yeah, honey, go on.
Okay.
And sorry, guys. I know that was a lot to take in with no stops. I'm sorry.
I would encourage everyone to watch the documentary, regardless of what your personal beliefs are on whether she did do it or not. I'm going to sum it up, but it's still absolutely worth the watch. I've seen many documentaries on many different topics. This is one of the best ones I've ever watched. So I think it's important to note that the very first question that was asked of her was, why are you doing this interview when you have no creative control? That's huge. She had no control over how this documentary went. None. So she was getting nothing out of this. Her parents did numerous interviews before the trial as well as after the trial. This is Casey Anthony's very first time speaking. That, in my opinion, speaks volumes as well. She goes into detail about the essay that she experienced from both her father and her brother. Many people have watched this, and there are telltale signs that you cannot fake when you have been a victim of SA. I've known several people that have been victims of SA. One thing that we need to make note of is that trauma like that alters your brain. You Do not behave rationally when you have been a victim and lived in a family that Casey Anthony lived. She was taught to lie from the time she was a little girl. It was the thing she knew. When you hear her conversations that they play for you between her parents when she's in jail, and her mom's like, well, where is she? Casey's flabbergasted that her mother actually asks her that question, because her mom, in my opinion, knew or had an inkling of what was going on. The first part of the documentary kind of just goes through the trial and that type of a thing, and then you go into the second episode and it kind of delves more into why she lied. She admits 100% all of her lies, and she tells you, I was doing what I was told to do. So somebody was controlling her in that time frame. I've heard a lot of people say, well, 31 days, I'm a parent, blah, blah, blah. I'm a mother. But I'm a mother who's not had the traumas that Casey Anthony has. So I cannot judge her for the way that she reacted during those 31 days. There are phone records. She called her father multiple times every single day in those 31 days. They had many conversations, and she would ask him, well, where is Kaylee? What's going on? And he would assure her that she was fine and that everything would be okay. And she believed him. You have to remember that this is a man who's manipulated her entire life. So how she reacts to that, we can't, in my opinion, judge her for that. There is a very poignant part in the very third episode where they show her father talking at the funeral.
Hey, Grizz, good to see you. That's my daughter.
And he puffs up his chest and he talks about how proud he is. And that he misses, and he closes his eye and strokes his cheek the way his granddaughter's lips felt when she would kiss his cheek. And he took a deep breath and inhaled when he talked about the sweet smell of her sweat. And it gave me chills the first time I ever saw it. It makes me sick even now. Like, I don't know who in their right mind would speak about their grandchild that way. And she loses her mind. She had never seen that before. She was not allowed to go to the funeral. So she had never seen him give that speech. They then show a clip of him giving an interview. I think it was a year or two before now. So I think it was 2018, maybe 2019. He just had a car accident and he was doing an interview with Dr. Oz. And he started to say that he wanted his daughter's forgiveness, and Cindy cut him off. There's another interview with the two of them where they fight. And Cindy tells him, well, she only does what she learned. In my opinion, those are all telling things and points the finger at one person. And I don't know if Mom wants me to give my theory or not, so I'll stop there. Mom, you're muted.
One of the things I wanted to say was that George, it comes out in the documentary, Casey's documentary, that George took $60,000.
Yes.
Stole $60,000 out of his wife's 401k. And he is a notorious liar himself. One of the things I didn't talk about in the case was that he had an affair during the trial. And he actually had an affair with a woman who was working to help find his granddaughter when they were out doing all the searches. And she actually became a witness and testified about her affair with him and her relationship with him. And he completely denied it. Oh, he absolutely didn't have a relationship with this woman. And she talked about it, extensively, and how he felt responsible for everything that happened that day. He basically told her that he was responsible for everything that happened to little Kaylee.
And I also want to point out that during the documentary, she details that while she was being assaulted by him, if she complained or made noise or resisted, he would put a pillow over her and smother her until she passed out. So,
and Casey cries when she talks about this, and she says that she wonders if that's what was happening that day, and that because Casey was so little, it went too far.
Yes.
During the trial, he also tried to commit suicide. He checked himself into a hotel in January and tried to kill himself. There was just so many red flags about George. And like I said, in the documentary, they asked him, the creators of this documentary, as Nicole stated, this documentary, Kaylee had no hands in. She was not allowed any kind of, she had to follow what they wanted to do.
She had to answer the questions that they wanted to ask
what was
her.
put to her. She could not say, I'm not going to talk about that, or I'm not going to do this. She had to do what they wanted. And she agreed to that, and she got paid no money for this.
No.
Even though everybody's running around, Nancy Grace is talking about how she took 10 years to come up with this story. No, she didn't. She was talking about this story when it was in the courtroom. She said that her father had sexually assaulted her as a child.
So I also would like to point out, because there's some stuff going on in the chat about her lying. I can't think of his name, Mom. What's the investigator's name?
Patrick McKenna.
Patrick McKenna is specifically asked by the people doing the documentary, in the past 10 years since you have known Casey Anthony, has she lied? And he said, no, she has never lied to me in the past 10 years. We've all lied about things. Whether it be a white lie or a big lie, we've all lied about things. That doesn't make you a constant and habitual liar. Yes, she lied about some very huge things, but I do believe she was doing what she was told to do. And her dad was trying to make her feel safe. He would go and tell investigators things about her, that she did this, and he can't believe this. And then he would go tell the media, my daughter did not do this. There's no way she hurt her daughter. He was playing both sides of the fence, and the whole time it was coming from a former cop, and they took him at his word.
Yep, they certainly did. And when they did interview in the documentary one of the top investigators of the case, and he still said, George is a good guy. He's a cop. We didn't have any reason not to believe George. He was a cop.
Even though he's a habitual liar himself.
He's a habitual liar who taught his daughter how to lie.
Yes.
He taught his daughter how to lie from a very early age, the age of 8, when he was coming into her bedroom at night and doing horrific things to her and telling her, you absolutely will not tell anyone about this. And anybody who's been through or knows anyone who's been through sexual assault as a child, the ramifications and what it does to children is unbelievable.
Especially when it's the parent, the one person who's supposed to protect you.
And Casey still says she was all about protecting her dad through all of this, because of what that grooming that he had done with her all of those years. And you can see the dynamic that is so dysfunctional in this family when you watch the dynamic between George and Cindy in the interviews that are continuing. I mean, Kaylee went completely silent after her case.
Yes.
She
and her
hasn't
parents
written any books. She
No.
hasn't done anything to make money off of her
and her
daughter's
parents
death.
have. Her
But
parents
her
have made a
grandparents
lot of
have.
money.
Her grandparents have.
And if you listen to the investigator in the documentary, the first time he stepped in that house, he knew something was wrong within the family. He didn't know quite what it was, but he knew something was wrong.
Yes.
And I'm here to tell you, I lived with my parents with my 2 young children for 6 years. And if my kids were gone for more than a day and I couldn't come up with where they were at, they would not have hesitated to make a phone call to the police, being their daughter or not. So
There's
to
just
sit
no
there
way.
and there's
I
just no
cannot
way.
believe that those parents were not searching for Casey, their own physical flesh and blood, who was gone for 30 days, who lived in their home. It makes no sense. Maria says she had no textbook diagnoses for any personality disorders. She was examined by multiple psychiatrists. Maria said she was shocked and intrigued by those accounts of the psychiatrists and the psychologists who worked with her. They could not find any personality disorders of her at all. And yet she was painted in the court of public opinion. And that is how bias works, you guys.
So all of the pictures that you saw floating through the media on Nancy Grace and God knows who else, those pictures were over the span of 4 years. 4 years. The one of her over a toilet was her 21st birthday. I couldn't even walk on my 21st birthday. I've also been drunk since I've had children. Does that make me a bad mom? No, it does not. No.
And you know what's sad is Maria's got a background in psychology, you guys. And that's one reason I love her, because she's so smart. But she says to tell you that she had to look back at some things about the MMPI, which is the assessment that they gave her. It's one of the most valid and reliable psychological assessments that's available. It's not perfect, but it's extremely hard to manipulate. These are the things that her defense learned about her before they ever went to trial. They learned about this stuff, but this is the stuff that the prosecution didn't bother to do. And that's why their case was so flimsy.
The documentary is not one-sided. I would like to point that out. There are several. They pull in the cop who still to this day believes that she committed this crime.
And so does the judge.
And so does the judge. The judge still the documentary does not.
He thinks it was an accident. The judge thinks it was an accident and she panicked and tried to cover it up.
Yeah.
But that's not what the investigator does not believe, or not the investigator, but the
detective.
The detective does not believe that. And Maria says, look into the MMPI psych assessment. It's not really in the hands of the psychologist. It's a well-developed assessment test, and it's designed to catch any attempts at lies or manipulation of answers. And so, yeah, it's, nothing is perfect, but this is what they use when they are trying to assess people for having psychological personality disorders. Casey Anthony is far from being a genius. No. She was a young mother. She was a teen mom at the age of 19. She was very young mother. And, yes, she admits that the lies she told were horrendous and that they were awful and she should never have done it. She does, but she also talks about
How
her
she should never. She also
and her
talks about.
boxes.
Also talks about how she should have never taken her back to that house.
Yeah, she said the number one mistake she made was letting them talk her in to coming back and living in that house with them when she had Kaylee. Kaylee. She should have went somewhere else and got her own place. Now, if you guys remember, I told you about the fact that she was charged with forging checks. That happened as well after Kaylee went missing.
Yes.
And it was her best friend, her absolute best friend in the world. She took her checkbook and wrote checks. And her best friend, still to this day, even after all the stuff that she did and the lies that she told and the money she stole from her, believes that there is no way Casey could ever have hurt Kaylee.
No. And anyone you
Absolutely
talk
not.
to, they interview several people, her old boyfriend, or I don't think it was her boyfriend, it was the roommate of her old boyfriend. And they all said what a doting mother she was.
Yep.
Kaylee was always with her. They were engaged. Kaylee adored her mother. She wanted to always be with her mom. She would sit and do flashcards on the floor of her boyfriend's apartment with her daughter. She was not this party girl that the media wanted you to believe that she was.
Right.
And even now they're still attacking her over it. There's a video out there from March where she's on stage at a rock concert dancing, and people are like, "Oh, well, there's the party girl." I mean, it's been 10 years. Does she not get to have a life? She was found not guilty. I mean, my mom's lost a child. Have you not ever had a moment of joy in the last 30 years?
Hang on a second. I'm just going to put this other picture up here for a minute.
There you go. That's a pleasant one.
This is a good picture. This is the picture where they fought on camera. But yeah, they're in an interview here. Look at those faces of these grandparents. But
I've believed her from the very beginning, by the way.
I believed her from the very beginning.
I never thought she did it. Those two people right there are.
I don't want to sound flippant, and I don't want to sound like a know-it-all. But as Maria said, and Nicole, my daughter, said, I have lost a child. And I feel like I'm a pretty good barometer for when people who've lost children are lying. I firmly believed the very first interview that I ever saw of Susan Smith, that woman was lying about knowing what happened to her little boys. Come to find out, she's the one who drove them off into the lake and killed them. I have had a ton of therapy. I have taught. I've went to class. I've went to school. I've learned about psychology. I have, started a local chapter, as I've told you, of the Compassionate Friends. They sent me on training to learn about how to talk to parents who've lost children, what things to look for. And all I'm saying is that these two people that are on this screen always gave me like something's not right here. Something is not right. That's all I'm saying here.
Cindy is not a loving
this
mother.
Woman is cold and angry, and she's not a loving mom, in my opinion. And what I'm saying is that is all those things play into who makes Casey who she is.
Yep.
And when Casey was home with her newborn baby, sitting in Kaylee's room on the floor with her mother and her newborn baby, she gets up the courage to tell this woman, her mother, that her brother Lee sexually assaulted her. She tells her mother that, and her mother looks over at her and says, well, I guess that's what you get for being a little whore. Who says that to their daughter who just opened up and said something to them that catastrophic of news? Can you absolutely imagine what it would be like for her then to want to have to tell her the truth about what George did to her? Heck no, she wasn't going to open up to her. She was not going to tell anybody in that house or in that family.
There are lots of people who are sexually abused by family members who never, ever say anything until years and years and years later.
My mom was 53 years old before she admitted to her sexual assault at the hands of her father. He assaulted all 4 of his daughters, all 4 of them. The oldest one, he had 2 children with that lived in their home. I have it deep in my family. I watched this with my own family. I know the signs. And all I can say is that man sitting right there has a lot of guilt. And he tried to kill himself. And it wasn't because he was grieving over the death of his granddaughter because she had just died. He was grieving because he knew how she died and who was responsible. And in 2018, he did an interview after a near fatal car accident. And he said, I just want to talk to Lee and to Casey and tell them I'm sorry for everything. And I'm like, what has he got to tell Lee? Did he also sexually assault him? Or was he just abusive to him? And I'm just like, you guys, seriously, this happens more in families than not. And that's the sad thing that we have in this world. And you know what?
It knows no boundaries. It doesn't matter your race, your economic standing, nothing.
Or nothing. And what's sad is when these kids talk and finally get the courage to talk about their sexual abuse, we don't want to believe them.
Nope.
We want to put our arms around the freaking abusers.
Yep.
It makes no sense, you guys. And then when you have professionals, what person in their right mind is going to take Casey Anthony in for 11 years and let her live with him and his family as another daughter?
Yeah, and I would also like to point out that the documentary, she goes moment by moment through the last time that Kaylee was seen, moment by moment.
She does, and you can see in her face
the pain. She loved that little girl.
She loved her very much, and she's like she said, she feels absolutely responsible for her death.
Yes, because
she left her alone by falling asleep with this man in that house.
Yeah.
And she tells you that Kaylee was never alone with him.
No.
Her mom was always there, or she was there, or she took Kaylee with her. And if you talk to the roommates of her boyfriend, all of them, except for one, never believed that she could do anything like that to Kaylee. They saw her interact with him or with her and how loving she was to her and how much Kaylee loved her mother. And there was one guy who kind of felt like maybe she did do this until after he saw the documentary and heard about what they told him, what they found out about George, about the sexual abuse, about the fact that they never looked at George's cell phone records for that day to find out where he was
and what he was doing. And the tape and the bag all came from the Anthony home, and they immediately just said that Casey did that. There were two other people that lived in that home that had access to all of those things.
And
Not just her.
Lee knew that that's how George disposed of their pets. Exactly the way she was disposed of. And it is sad. You know, that stuff never really got the traction. If I'd have been the defense attorney, I'd have pounded on that and pounded on that. I'm serious, because that to me is just like, you know, crazy. But anyway, it's interesting. Let's go back here and look and see what some of the comments have been, and if there's been any questions, you guys. And let's see. True Crime Maria said, you did share some thoughts with me that I didn't think I would agree with, but I did end up having some major changes in my thoughts, and certainly different questions than before. And there's absolutely one thing that I will say to all of you. I'm not here to sway anyone.
Mm-mm.
I'm not here to sway any of you or turn your opinion different from what you believe. I'm here to tell you, don't pass judgment until you have all the information.
Right. And
Go read about the case.
And
go watch the documentary, and then make your choice or make your decision.
And
don't
you're
make
welcome.
your decision based upon what the media and their narrative during this case was to you, because it created bias in you, and confirmational bias, where you will only watch something that talks about her guilt.
Yeah.
And not about her innocence.
And I would like to point out that you are welcome to believe whatever narrative you want to believe.
For sure.
But she has been found innocent in a court of law.
Yep.
Therefore, she is innocent, whether you like that narrative or not.
But she can't live as though she is.
No.
Because there's still people out there that want her dead.
She lives like a recluse.
Yep. She lives like a recluse.
So those of you out there that think that, you know, she's
living the high life,
and everything, she's absolutely not.
She can't go anywhere.
So she doesn't even do the interviews at her home. They rented a house.
And George in 2018 said that he wanted so bad to reconcile with his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that did this documentary, they gave him that chance.
Yeah, they did.
He refused
he didn't
to do the documentary. He refused because they were going to call him out, and he didn't want to have to be on camera with that one. But anyway, we'll get his face off of here and go back to the beautiful kids. So let's go on here. Let's see. So we got through that one. Verbal Judo says, that's exactly why I learned to always listen to the other side. I might just learn something. I might even change my perspectives. And it's true. Thank you for that. It's trying to be unbiased and look at it like you would from a juror's mind, because when you're looking at these cases, no matter how hard it is, you've got to take your bias out of it and really what your opinions are and base it on the evidence.
Yes.
And they got it right, you guys, because the evidence in this case is flimsy as heck.
So I just want to point out that one of the biggest items for the prosecution's case was that whole air test stuff from the back of the car where her mom said it smelled like a dead body. Well, what's her mom know what a dead body smells like?
I always wondered that too.
I don't even know what that smells like.
Sounds like they were prompted by maybe an in-house detective.
So the defense's attorney was actually really, really good. He, I found an article where he goes in and he talks about a study that was done with pigs, corpses in trunks, and what they found when they would decay. And you would find all kinds of bugs and materials and other things that they did not find in Casey's car. There were no bugs. There were no traces of bugs. There was nothing. And I know that we were talking earlier and there were cadaver dogs that hit on the car. But it was the first time those dogs were used. Was that it? Yeah. So again, that's not a perfect science either. I don't even know if that.
George also said he was telling detectives
Yeah.
that the car smelled like a dead body, but when he was on the stand, he was telling them that it actually smelled like pizza, which was in the garbage bag. There was leftover pizza and pizza boxes. So the other thing to remember here is the number one witness for the prosecution was George Anthony, her own father. And he went to a grand jury and got her indictment. He's the one who was the reason that she was indicted because of whatever he said to that grand jury. And she never knew that. She didn't find that out until later, after the case was over, that her dad is the one who went to the grand jury and that he was a witness for the grand jury. He never told her that. He was always acting like he was on her side, but he was speaking out of both sides of his mouth because he was telling her and Cindy how much he loved her and was on her side. And he was telling law enforcement something completely different. It's almost like he was willing to watch his daughter go to the electric chair for this. And that, in my mind, is one sick individual.
And I just want to point, because there's a lot of talking about her lying still, and that weighs heavily for your opinion, and I absolutely
Everybody
understand that.
lies.
But what you have to look is the links that a person will go to protect their abuser. And this is across the board. Look at women who are physically and sexually abused by their husbands or their significant others, children who are SA'd by a close relative or parent. They protect them. Even when they're removed from the home and there's no imminent danger, they still try to protect that person. And that's what she was trained to do, was to protect her dad.
Yep. Above all
else. And trauma, again, go research it and go look at it. It changes your brain physiologically.
Certainly does.
And the way that your brain works, and you don't have the same rationalizations that those of us without it have.
I don't think she's had a long time to perfect her version of events.
It's never changed.
Because it's just never changed. Even her defense team, many of them will tell you she's told the same story from day one when they first met her. It's never changed. It's never altered. And it's proven that liars, their stories change.
Yeah.
Even somewhat. It's hard to remember
details and things.
All the lies you tell.
I would point out too that people were like, well, why didn't the defense team present George as a suspect? Well, because they had no evidence.
Yeah.
That you can't just go into court and say, well, this person did it and not be able to prove it.
Right.
They had the same evidence against George that they had against Casey, and it didn't hold up.
Right. And that's why they couldn't do that. And even putting Casey on the stand and having her testify to the sexual abuse wouldn't have been enough, because it just wouldn't. It had been too long and it had already been tainted. People wanted her put to death for the death of her daughter.
Right.
They were standing outside court every day screaming for her to be killed.
Hologram, what 3 different stories did you hear come out of her mouth about what happened to Kaylee that day?
Oops.
So she's admitted that Xana was a lie. Those are all, she's admitted to all of her lies. She admitted to all of her lies before the trial even started.
Yep.
That has never changed.
She admitted to all of it.
Her core.
If you watch the documentary, it'll explain to you why she lied.
Yep.
Northern Light says, like right away, I was questioning what would make her lie. I had a feeling Casey was sexually assaulted. I also believe she had a lot more to do with the incident than she is willing to say out loud. I think that it could very well be possible that after she saw him standing there with Kaylee all wet, that she absolutely blocked everything else out and doesn't remember because it was so traumatic.
I think what happened was she came around the side of that pool and she saw him holding her, and she was that 8-year-old little girl again, and she felt helpless. And she went into self-preservation.
Yep. And it's just and that's just how I feel.
She could not have drowned. The ladder was not
down.
There was no way for her to get into the pool unless somebody got in with her or put her in there.
Yeah, put her in the pool to make it seem like she had drowned. It's okay, CN red flags. It's okay. It's really important to look at everything, and sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. We've all said and done things. We've all lied. Any of us that sit here tonight and say that we haven't lied, we're lying, at least to ourselves, because that's just human nature. So for everybody to want to put Casey Anthony in the electric chair simply because she told a lie or two or three, to me, that's not what that's not where the burden of proof is for a death sentence in this country. Just because she lied does not make you a murderer of your child.
No, it does not.
John, you are absolutely right. Nancy was judge and jury, and she's still doing it. I mean, she's still doing it 14 years later. Anybody who watches her can see it. She gets a hold of anybody's case, and whoever's been arrested, they are damn well guilty and need to go. And that's coming from a woman who has her own trauma because she is the victim of a horrible crime. Her fiance was murdered. So, of course, she's got her own trauma. Nancy Grace does.
So that's a bias, which we all have bias when we go into these cases and we're all looking at them. I'm always on the side of the victim.
It's okay, Northern Light, to have mixed feelings. At least you gave it a listen.
It is.
At least you watched it.
But I think you have to be open to different narratives of cases than what you can't have tunnel vision.
Oh, hi, Miracle Heart. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Tecta said he was going to get Hernandez off a murder charge. He must be talking about Jose Baez.
He's an amazing attorney, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? He didn't have a lot of experience when he took that case, which is really kind of crazy when you think about it. But he had a really good support team put together.
Yeah, he did.
That was doing all the research and getting all the information. And I think that was very helpful. Verbal says, for those who don't know, if your question gets accidentally passed over, Kristen will always read messages and emails. That is very true. So if you do want to ask something, please put it in the chat, or you can always email me and I'll answer it. Kristen, you are good. So good at laying out the story. Deb, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Ryan says, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say she isn't getting anything out of this. Well, that's you can feel that way. I don't see what it would be.
No,
at this point, like I said,
not gaining any financial.
She's not getting any friends.
And no, she's not. She's getting probably less.
So, and she knew that. She knew going into this that what she was facing, and she did this for herself. She didn't do this to appease you guys or anybody that thinks she's guilty. She says that in the documentary, that she finally got to a point through her many, many hours of therapy to where she feels that she's strong enough now to stand on her own 2 feet and to tell her truth.
She's definitely a more poised woman.
Yes.
And that scared, in my opinion, when I watched her on the jail videos and during the trial, she was a terrified little girl. She's not that terrified little girl anymore.
Yeah, John, I'm telling you, the sexual assaults happen a lot more than we want to admit in families. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. And it does, and I don't mean just by parents, by fathers or mothers, but uncles, cousins. I mean, it just happens in families. Let's see. John said, George seems shady to me, but not that shady. He's
He
pretty
seemed
shady.
very shady to me.
Very shady to me.
I
felt it from the first time I saw him talk. And then after that whole fiasco at the memorial service.
Oh
my God, you guys, go back and watch it. I'm serious. If it's in the documentary, if you have not seen it, you need to watch it and just listen to him. Why would his wife, mother, grandmother of Kaylee stay with him? You're not buying this. Well, I guess you don't understand why women who are with abusers stay with them, because she is also a victim. Yes, and she is going to protect him. That's why.
And in my opinion, George did it.
I just told you guys of the abuse that my mother and her sisters went through. My grandmother stayed with my grandfather and was still taking care of him the day he died, after he fathered 2 children with her oldest daughter.
And all of her siblings, I went to a funeral and they all treated them like nothing had ever happened.
Yep.
None of them
never talked about.
It was
never talked about.
Yeah, never talked about. Never acknowledged. Never
ugly secret that you never talked about.
You never talked about it. You're trying to compare her,
Casey.
You're trying to compare Casey's lying to yourself and how you are, and you've not had the same traumas that she has. That's what we keep trying to say. When you have the extent of trauma that she had at such an early age, what people don't realize is that a lot of our core personality traits are formed by the age of 5. Your core personality traits are there at 5 years old. She was raised with lying that entire time, as well as beyond. It's the only thing she knew. You lied to protect the family.
And to cover up.
Most of us aren't raised that way.
You should watch the replay. Kristen covers the facts in the case and how the evidence was thin. Yes. And that's the thing. Make up your own mind. Yep. Don't just decide, I'm not going to watch it. I don't need to know. You do need to. If you're going to look at a case, you have to look at everything. You can't pick and choose what you choose to look at. Otherwise, you're not being fair to the case.
Verbal, that is true. And once you've been SA'd, you are twice as likely to be victimized again by a different perpetrator. And Casey talks about Kaylee's birth father in the documentary and how that came about.
I don't know if that was his initial intention, but I'm here to tell you, anybody that goes to a grand jury and throws their daughter under the bus when they know that they've been charged with, are going to be charged with capital murder, yeah, I would say that his intent was to frame her. And if what happened to little Casey, and God knows that our little Casey didn't want to believe it at first. And when you listen to her in the documentary, as she talks about it, about how he used to smother her with a pillow because she didn't want to conform to what he wanted that night. And she would beg him no. And he didn't want to hear no. So he would put a pillow over her face and smother her until she passed out. And if that's what he did to this little girl right here, she was much smaller than the 8-year-old he used to do it to. Yeah. And maybe it was an accident and she did die.
and that's what I believe happened. I don't think that George intentionally
I don't think he killed
harmed
her on
her.
purpose.
No.
Uh-uh.
No, and then I think he panicked, and I think he put her in the pool because he was worried about what Casey was going to do, and if he wasn't able to control her and she did go call 911, he needed to be able to have something to
And
tell
he put her in the pool to make it look like she drowned, and then screamed and yelled at Casey to blame her because Casey was home with her and went to sleep. Look what you're guilty of. Look what you did
what
here.
you did.
But Casey knew better because she knew that the
Ladder.
was not up, and that there was no way that Kaylee could have gotten in that pool without being put in there. And
Where do you guys see these things? Is it the shopping?
Hang on a second. I missed some of the chat, you guys, so I'm trying to go back and catch some of it.
So what's at a gas station?
But you know what? That's not really true about her being a lot more than normal, because we just told you that she was found to not have any psychological or mental personality disorders. So that's not true. In your mind, she is, but that's not true in the expert's mind.
No.
That's the bias again that's coming in there.
Oh yeah, I do.
Let's see. Yeah, the ones for the boys too.
Boys report it far less than girls.
Yeah, the boys do for sure. Of course it is. Of course, documentaries, all documentaries are edited. The documentary before her documentary that tried to show her guilt, that's the same thing. If you watch that documentary, it's the same thing. Island, it's showing her guilt.
And I don't think that these I get what you're saying with, they have their own bias, but I thought they did a really good job of showing
I did
both
too.
sides, both
I
the
did too.
prosecution and the defense.
Because they had both sides in the documentary.
They did.
And that's what, if you're going to do a documentary and you're going to be honest and open, you really need to show both sides.
You do.
And talk about both sides. It's the same with a case. You can't look at a case and try to figure out someone's guilt if you're not willing to look at everything. Yep. Every single piece of evidence, every single piece of documentation. And when you have someone in the house that's not been vetted and hasn't been looked at by investigators, because he's a quote unquote good guy, that's a problem.
That's that good old boys mentality.
They didn't even ping his phone.
Nope.
They didn't pull his phone records to see where he was. The defense did. The defense saw all the phone calls that was being made between father and daughter during the 31 days after she disappeared.
Hologram, I have a minor in psychology, and I work with at-risk teens every single day, so I have hands-on experience on trauma and how people react to trauma. So maybe it is a bias, or maybe it's just that I have more experience with trauma, so I have a better view of it. That could be too.
Yeah. Oh, you're not writing nonsense. You would never write nonsense. I know better. I know better. It's like I said to you guys in the beginning. If you remember when I talked to you guys last week about me doing this case, I said I was going to really upset a lot of people. And I knew that going in. I knew that I wasn't going to get much viewers on this show because people don't want to hear this narrative, because the narrative in this country was skewed by the news media. And it's
Um,
wrong.
So here's a thing too, hologram. My grandmother lived in one of the most abusive homes I've ever known, as far as both physical and sexual violence. And she was the most loving and caring person I've ever known in my entire life. Entire life. So there's both, you have both spectrums. There's people who come out of those homes completely devoid of any moral compass. And then there are people that come out the other end. So both things can be said as far as the outcome of living in an abusive home.
I mean,
And statistically speaking, there are far fewer people that continue the abuse than there are those that or
become
that don't
abusive.
continue it. I mean, then continue it.
Well, let me tell you, it surely ruined many, 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 many lives.
Yes.
My mother came from a family of 10, and they're a huge family, lots of children from the 10, lots of great grandchildren and great great grandchildren, and everybody's been touched by this. And the sad thing about it is that it was going on it's rural America. It's people knew about it. The school knew about it. They talked about those girls when they would come to school, because they did know about it. And nobody did anything.
Nope.
Nobody wanted to get involved.
And that was back before mandatory reporting.
Most of the time, you don't know about it.
Nope.
Most of the time, nobody ever suspects. You would never know that that person sitting next to you. Do you know how many wives have not known that their husbands were sexually assaulting their children? We read about it. We take these cases on in true crime all the time.
Hologram, I'm not saying that it changes or excuses any of her behavior about lying. I'm just saying it explains why she did that and why she behaved the way that she did. Should she have not done that? Absolutely. She should have been forthcoming from the very beginning.
But I think that her awful behavior is just as should her parents' awful behavior needs to be questioned just as much as hers. Because why the
She's
heck
a product
wasn't
of their
her parents-
environment.
Why wasn't her parents looking for her for 30 days?
Or for their granddaughter, whom they just were so upset that they couldn't find.
I'm here to tell you, if I didn't see my grandchildren or hear from them in a day, I would be chomping at the bit at that girl sitting there in front of me and asking her where in the heck my grandchild was. I wouldn't wait 31 days and then call to report my car stolen.
And I will,
and then just happen to say, oh, and by the way, my granddaughter's been missing for 31 days too. But my car smells like a dead body.
No. And I will tell you, I had a 4-year-old at this time, and we were living with my parents. So mom and I watched this case together, and she looked right at me. She goes, I would have called the cops on you already. I mean, she told me that from the beginning. I'm like, geez, thanks, mom, but I wouldn't expect anything less.
Melissa says, yes, my fiance had no idea his daughter was molested for years by her stepdad until just recently. A now 21-year-old just goes on with her life and tries to forget. And it's because she can't be hurt by him no more. And it happens so much. Maria says, I have watched too much footage with Cindy yet. I haven't watched too much footage with Cindy yet, but I feel like she was truly the most innocent one in everything. Seemed like she was the total clueless one. I could be so wrong though. Yeah, I don't believe she was.
I don't believe she was clueless. I believe if you listen to Casey Anthony talk about her mother, she was a control freak. So I think that she may not have known the extent of everything that happened the day that Kaylee met her demise, but she knows enough. And I think that fight that her and George have on camera during that interview points directly at how much she knows.
Yeah.
But again, they wanted to portray this perfect American family,
Melissa,
that
that's
everybody
so
strives
sad.
to be, and they fell short.
Verbal judo, I am so sorry. And it's you have to there comes a time, I think, where you have to look at what's happened and not really hold yourself accountable, but realize that it's not your fault. If you're a victim, you're a victim, and you can rise above that and be more than just a victim, because it wasn't your fault. And that's what I believe that Casey has tried to do these last 11 years. Is I believe she's tried to come to terms with the choices that she made, that put her and Kaylee in a dangerous situation, because she knew it was dangerous. It is why her father was never left alone with his granddaughter. I was never left alone with my grandfather. I always questioned my mom about it, because I used to want to go down to the barn with him and go down and feed the horses and feed the pigs and stuff. I was never allowed to do any of that. So I know that, and I remember what that felt like. But anyway, she knew, and I think it took her all these years through therapy to realize that, she's probably never going to get away from feeling guilty for what happened that day, and for her responsibility in it. Because as she says, she was the one who was supposed to protect her daughter above all else. She was the one she feels like she failed her. And she's never going to get over that. She'll never have that go away. I think that, verbal, I understand that. I understand the lashing out. I have anger sometimes that builds up inside of me over my son's death, and I can be very angry at others, and it has nothing to do with them. It has to do with the anger that I carry.
Usually it's when I discipline my kids.
Yeah, I get upset. I do get upset at that.
And then I just look at her and say, who taught me to be a mom?
So it's like, I do, but it's just damage that, you never get over. I just wish that they had done a better job at looking at everyone. I think this case speaks so greatly to when law enforcement gets tunnel vision and only looks at one suspect and absolutely won't look at anyone else. And I think that is what upset. The whole thing about this is explained in the documentary, because her boyfriend was a promoter and she was working for him. She wasn't partying every single night after her daughter went missing.
Pictures are deceptive.
Those pictures that you were seeing, you were believing that. And you were also being told that by the media and by Nancy Grace every night. Look what Casey's out doing. And that's not what she was out doing.
She does say that she tried to be as normal as she possibly could in those 30 days, but I think it's because she was trying to process.
And she never believed her daughter was
heal.
missing, because her father told her he wasn't. She wasn't.
He kept telling her
that it was going to be okay.
It was going to be okay. And if you look at the phone records that the defense shows you, she called him multiple times a day during those 30 days. So it wasn't like, and that's why I think the mother knows more than what she leads on to.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. You asked the question, so I'm going to answer you. My son died October the 16th. My daughter's birthday is October 1st. My birthday is October 31st, as you guys know. He died on the 16th, and 15 days later, I went to a surprise birthday party for myself. It was a surprise. It was a costume party, and I dressed up for it and went to that party, and my son was gone.
And she also dressed up and came to my school party that day.
And I also went to her school Halloween party, dressed up, because that was my daughter, and I needed to try to be normal, and I wanted to try to be normal. But I wasn't normal. I was completely and absolutely gutted and traumatized, but I was going through the motions of trying to appear normal.
It's called faking it until you make it. And grief does not have a one size fits all. And you could be in denial for a very long time. And that's where Casey could have been. We don't know what stage of grief. There's 7 stages, and you don't follow them in order. You can bounce around in different ones at different times, and you'll be in one and you'll go to this one. My dad's been in anger for 30 some years. He can't get past that one. And I don't blame him for that. So, and it's easy for us to sit here on the outside and say, well, if that was me and that was my kid, that's what I would do.
And that you'll never be able to truly say.
And you'll never, and that's not, it's not fair to do that to people.
You don't know. You have no idea. You can try to imagine. Maria understands. We've talked about it so much. And
yes, Olivia, I do believe that she's innocent, and I do believe she was grieving.
When, trauma, we react to trauma in so many different ways. We can completely and absolutely shut down, or we can absolutely block it out as if it didn't even happen. I hate that saying, verbal. I absolutely hate that.
Yeah,
people
it's an
used
unfair
to
one.
send me cards after my son died. People that I didn't know, because I told you guys this was all big in the news. And I would get notes and stuff from people who didn't even know me, telling me, oh, Kristen, you can have more children. God never gives you anything you can't handle. I absolutely hate that. What makes me so special? So yeah, but anyway,
sadly, I don't think we're ever going to know for sure what happened.
I just
we're never going to have the truth.
Their case.
The police completely botched this.
Absolutely did not prove their case. I think the jury got it right. Thank God they did.
Yeah,
that's all I can say, because it is a hefty burden to sit on a jury that you're going to put somebody to death. And you can easily say that you could do that until you're faced with it. So, but yeah, I appreciate all you guys being here. I think you guys are wonderful for putting up with me all night and listening to everything that we had to say. Does anybody have anything else that they want to say or talk about? John, thank you so much for being here tonight with us. And Deb, thank you for coming in and everything. And I'm just glad everybody was respectful and we didn't have any major stuff going on in the chat, Like I said, Nicole and I aren't here to make people change your minds about how you feel.
Nope.
All I wanted was everybody to realize that when you look at a true crime case, you have to look at all the evidence. And all the evidence was not laid out in that trial. And some of the evidence that was presented in that trial was completely and absolutely not good evidence. And this case has been used to teach in multiple law schools across this country. I did so much research on this before I decided to cover it. And I've read so many briefs that were done by law students on different aspects of it over the last 4 days. And I'm just here to tell you guys that case did not match the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And so, yeah, I just wanted to cover it. Like I said, it's a volatile case. I hope to God we never see another one like it, because every time a person is convicted in the media before you ever get to trial is not the way it should be. And whoever said earlier in the show tonight that you try to not judge anymore, my mother always told me to judge gently, because we're not supposed to do that. And I try to do that. And I think you guys know that from watching my show. I try to be fair and factual. And that's what I tried to do tonight. Hey, Kiwi, thank you so much.
I've heard so many people say, "Oh, I can't stand to watch that documentary because she did it." Again, it's watch it. Are you afraid of having your opinion changed? Is that why you don't want to watch it?
Oh, it's about dying on that hill.
Yeah.
Remember, we've talked about it in Delphi for how many months?
It may not change your opinion.
It's about dying on that hill, getting up on that hill and dying for your POI. But I get it. I do. And I'm so glad that Hologram, I love you. You're here all the time. You support my channel. I don't have any ill feelings towards you at all.
No.
So
you are entitled to your opinion.
You're entitled to that opinion.
It's a valid opinion.
And there's so many things. Hi, Digital. How are you? Yeah, just give it a watch. And then you can come back and tell me, hey, Rose, how are you? That was me. I did the same thing. I had to act as normal as I could, or I knew I wouldn't survive. It was the same thing for me. It was because I knew that I had her sitting here to take care of, and that she desperately needed me. And she'll tell you, I wasn't there for her for the first couple of years afterwards. I was kind of you were there, but through the motions.
Yeah.
I was going through the motions.
Yeah. It was, it's kind of interesting because, we've talked about trauma a lot this tonight, and I didn't even realize until 2 years ago that my brother's death was my trauma. I never saw it that way, but it absolutely changed so many different things about me.
Oh, it definitely changed her, but I think it's made her a better person. I think that it made us all better people. He taught us so much in a short amount of time, and it robbed her of her childhood in so many ways because she had to grow up so fast. But trauma is trauma. And I never realized until 5 years after he passed away, almost 10, I guess, actually, 10 years after he was gone, that I actually suffered from PTSD. I had no idea that I had post-traumatic stress. So you're fine, Verbal Judo. You don't need to pretend anymore. Oh, Casey Jakes, don't get Nicole and I started on that one.
Oh Lord, yeah, you'll be really mad at me if we talk about that one.
We feel the same about that case.
Mm-hmm. We can cover that one at some point.
Yeah, we could cover that one at some point. But again,
I tend to always
goes back to how the media covers these cases.
It is.
And some people don't dive in and really look for things. They go with the flow. And this is what the media is saying, so it must be true.
Yes.
So,
and I am not a Nancy Grace fan.
Oh, Olivia, you are so right. You don't know other people's trauma either. Nope.
I understand where she comes from with her own trauma, but I feel that she does things.
Good night, Cheryl. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you. But yeah, like I said, I'm just glad I covered it. And there was a time when I watched Nancy Grace, but I was much, much younger, and I've really matured. And yeah, I just can't. Yeah, it's just really weird. I just can't do Nancy Grace anymore. But
Oh, Mom, what's the name of the documentary?
oh, the new one. Hold
Yeah.
on a second. It is
You have it
called.
open.
I'll put the name of it in there. Do you have it, honey?
I don't.
Okay, just a second.
I'd have to look it up.
Where the Truth Lies.
Honestly, Casey, I don't think you have to worry about her having any more kids. I don't think she plans to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think she's interested in having any.
I don't
kind
think
of a
she's going to go through
relationship.
that ever again.
Nope.
Yeah. Nope.
I could be wrong, but that's my take on it.
Yeah, it is a terrible tragedy. That little girl right there did not deserve what happened to her.
Nope.
She certainly did not. And you know, it's just sad. But you know, everybody's saying, how could they just don't understand how she could do this and how she could do this. Do you understand how the FedEx driver backed into a little girl, picked her up, threw him in her truck, and then choked her to death?
No, that makes
Do you
no sense to
understand
me.
that?
No. Well, it's like I said the last time I was on with you. I said, if you can make sense of these cases, then we need to just stop because none of them make sense.
It's okay. We don't always have to agree. We don't always have to. That's
There are
what makes the
some
world go
things that
around.
is okay to agree
Yep.
to disagree on. This is
It's
one of
okay.
them.
As long as we remain respectful of one another, it's okay to disagree.
And again, hologram, I'm not saying you make very valid points.
Oh yeah,
you do. I'm
for sure. Yep, for sure. Hey Rosewood, how are you? I haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you always. Yeah, it's like, you know, just I was shocked when I heard some of the stuff. But not as shocked as most people, because from the very beginning I was like, no, this stinks and he stinks and I don't like the way it looks. That was my opinion. But anyway, you guys, it's been a couple of hours. I don't want to keep you any longer. It's been a great live. I'm glad you all were here. We do that a lot. We do that a lot.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do.
But yeah, it's yeah, they are. Watch his interviews with law enforcement, you guys. You can go out and find them.
Are we talking about George?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
He leads the investigators. He leads the
whole
interrogations.
Yeah.
Of him. It's insane. Yeah, it's really insane. But yeah.
Well, and we didn't talk about the little bit, like her parents, George and Cindy, made a foundation before this case even went to trial to help other people find their missing children. And I'm just like, you haven't even finished this case and you are taking people's money, and they've been under investigation for that. Like, there's just some very shady things going on with those people.
Yep. They tried to sell some depositions during their they were sued by their bank for their house foreclosure, and they were going to take some some deposition tapes and try to sell them to the media to get money to pay on their house.
Yeah.
And the court told them no. They couldn't do that. So, yeah, I mean, just hey Connor. It was yeah, he's got some temper tantrums, all right. You can see his temper. But so
Mhm.
does Cindy. So it's
Yes, she does.
both are just something else. But anyway, you guys, thanks so much for hanging out. Everybody have a good evening. It was so good to be with all of you. Nicole, thank you, or Shelby, thank you so much for being here.
I'm tired.
And I can tell. And I will see you guys on Tuesday. Good night, everybody.
Good night.